You are listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, a podcast for Freemasons and the public, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular.
Welcome back to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast. I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina, and this is episode 10 of the podcast, which we've entitled A Grand Master's Journey, an interview with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict. Before we go into what is going to be a very fantastic episode and a very special interview with the immediate past Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict, I first want to say to our listeners, thank you very much for the support you're giving us, especially to those listeners who listen to us from across Australia and around the world. We've been very pleased with the uptake and support you've given our podcast over the last 10 weeks, and we're very surprised that we've been able to reach so many people across the world so very quickly. 10 episodes may seem like not much in comparison to other podcasts, but we'd like to celebrate the fact that we've reached 10 weeks of content. As you know, our episodes go for a little longer than some other podcasts, mainly around about an hour and a half for a lot of the substantive episodes. So we'd like to think we've provided some pretty interesting, comprehensive, and hopefully worthwhile content to you. But thank you very much for making it possible. Your support and loyalty and sharing of this education tool to other Masons has made it such a success, and we look forward to bringing you to light further in the future. I'd like to do a shout out to the now worshipful brother, Stephen Hall of Central Australia Lodge number 88 that meets in Bourke, New South Wales, under the United Grand Lodge of New South Wales in the Australian Capital Territory. Brother Steve Austin, who is also a regular host on this podcast, and I, along with Brother Andrew Powers and Brother Paul Aquilina, have just come back from Bourke after travelling a long way from Melbourne to seeing a fantastic ceremony at Central Australia Lodge. Brother Steve, I'd like to wish you and your lodge the best over the next 12 months. We thank you for making us feel so welcome, and it was really pleasing to see so many visitors from across the state and country coming to you, converging in Bourke to celebrate one of the most important nights in any Master Mason's Masonic career, and that is being installed in the chair of King Solomon. It was especially awesome to be able to meet the most worshipful immediate past Grand Master of your jurisdiction, and of course the current Grand Director of Ceremonies of your jurisdiction. It was a great day, it was a great night, it was a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to you guys coming down to Melbourne, or us coming back up to visit you in the near future. Now, that's all we have for news. As I indicated, I will be the only host for this episode today, mainly because it will be focused on an interview that we conducted just before leaving for New South Wales with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict. Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict served as Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria from 2014 to 2016, which this year saw the installation of the current Grand Master, Most Worshipful Brother Don Reynolds. Hillel Benedict's time as Grand Master has been viewed by some as a huge success, full of many changes that were necessary and overdue, and by others in Victoria as a period of controversy. And it's like with all Grand Masters and leaders of any organisations, you always hear differing perspectives. So we thought, why not ask the man himself? We believe that this is the first interview that's been conducted with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel since he's left his office, which means that this should be a comprehensive overview of not only his time as Grand Master, but his reflections now and also the journey that led him to that path. From what I also understand, this is one of the very unique interviews for a Masonic podcast. My colleagues in both the United States and the United Kingdom have attempted to get past Grand Masters on and have been unsuccessful, but we've been very lucky that not only have we been able to secure an interview with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel, that he kindly offered his time to us first so we could approach him, which made my job so much easier. So, before we start the episode, and obviously the interview, I'd just like to reiterate, Most Worshipful Brother Hillel, thank you very much for giving us your time and for doing us the honour of being able to interview you about a really important job, one that people don't understand and generally don't need or usually seek to inquire about how it works and the story of how you get there. Without further ado, I'd like to now commence the episode by commencing the interview with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict, the immediate past Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria. So we have a very special interview here today for the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. We're very lucky to have a moment to talk with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict, who is the immediate past Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria. Hillel, I just want to say on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, thank you very much for giving us your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Jack. I do appreciate the opportunity. I feel honoured.
And we're going to have a great interview. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the aspects of Grand Mastership that a lot of people speculate about but don't really understand. I joined Freemasonry in 2013, so it was just before you started. But I think that I identify a lot with your period in office because as I was paying attention to things, I saw you up there and on the live webcast. And so this is going to be very significant for me, I think, as well as I hope it is for you.
That's
so
great. What
we're going to do for our listeners' sake, just so you understand the structure of the conversation, we're going to pretty much jump through different chapters, I'm going to call them, of Hillel's trip to the Grand Mastership, and we're going to do a bit of a reflection on his time in office. And as I promised, and as Hillel was nice to offer us, we're going to have open-ended questions. We're going to have questions on all ranges of topics, and I've been assured that we're going to have a fantastic conversation with some very thorough answers, so I look forward to that. Okay, so let's just talk about your early days. I want to know a bit about when you first joined Freemasonry and what influenced you to join, what attracted you to this organisation that a lot of people out there look at and think, that's a bit bizarre.
I guess I didn't know a great deal about Freemasonry back then. I joined in 1975. I was initiated in May of that year. My father was a Freemason, and he was only relatively new to Australia, but he'd bought a business, and the man he bought the business off was a Freemason. They obviously developed a relationship, and they invited him to join. As soon as my older brother and myself were sort of age, he invited both of us to join, and I joined in Camberwell Lodge, number 159, which met at Prospect Hill Road in Camberwell.
And have they since folded and merged with another lodge?
They've since merged with another lodge, and they merged in 1979.
Yes. Yep.
And my brother and I and my father and a good friend of ours, the three of us who were initiated together, moved to a lodge locally in the Bayside area, and we joined Lodge Fraternal, where I'm still a member today.
Yes, Lodge Fraternal. I heard of Lodge Fraternal. I was going to ask, do Grand Masters still maintain memberships of lodges? I guess that's the case that you do.
Well, anybody in any office within the hierarchy is still a member of a lodge.
Yes.
Because all the positions are volunteer positions, except for the paid office staff at Freemasons Victoria. So yeah, you always maintain your membership of your own lodge.
So would you consider yourself a member of a local lodge first before being maybe a Grand Lodge officer, or is it one of those things?
Yeah, no, you always consider yourself a member of the local, your local lodge or your mother lodge.
Yeah.
And during my time as Grand Master and through most of my Grand Lodge career, I didn't miss very many meetings of my own lodge. It was an important day in the calendar.
That's fantastic. So there you go. And you said that your father was a Freemason, and obviously that opened the door to you. I mean, one of the things that I experienced, I didn't know anyone in Freemasonry when I joined. I sort of went through the Grand Lodge website, knew nothing about the ritual side of things, and went to this initiation. It was the most mind-blowing experience I'd ever had. How was it for you? It must have been special having your dad in the room.
I mean, it was enormous because the only person I did know in that environment were the other two candidates, because one was my brother and the other was a very close family friend. So three of us were initiated on the one night, and the only person we knew in there, was my father. And it turned out on that occasion that lodge had two official visits, and we're talking back in 1975. The numbers were probably
a little bit bigger.
A little bit bigger than what they are today. And so when we had the opportunity to see everybody in the room, there was a room full of people, and we were just blown away by the whole experience.
That would have been incredible.
It was.
So you joined. Was it Camberwell Lodge?
Camberwell Lodge.
Yep. You joined Camberwell Lodge. It closed. You said not long after you joined.
4 years later. 4 years.
So when did you serve in the chair of King Solomon? Was that fraternal?
It was a fraternal. I ended up going through as master in 1988.
Okay. Yep.
So it was close to Freemason Victoria's centenary. Which was in 1989. I was actively involved in the masters group in the area, and there was, I think, 43 lodges in the Bayside area. It was pretty pretty big time.
Yeah, incredible.
And that was terrific back
25 years later, you become Grand Master, so there you go.
Well, yeah. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Exactly right.
Who would have thought?
That gives, I guess, our listeners a good idea of the timeline we're talking about here. And I just want to ask you about your first grand team. Now, I'm just a Master Mason, I'm a Senior Deacon, so I'm nowhere near the point of even being in the chair, let alone in a grand team. So how does this happen? How did you get approached, or is it something you're always interested in?
Yeah, to me it was a bit of a mystery back then as well. I actually just received a letter one day saying, and you've got to be have completed your term as Worshipful Master of the Lodge. I got a letter one day inviting me to come for an audition to be a Grand Lodge officer. And I think what happens is some of the senior Freemasons in the area would keep an eye out for people that they think might be suitable, and they'd put your name forward and you'd get invited. But it was mysterious as to how it occurred.
So you made eye contact and you got a letter in the mail. That's fantastic.
So I got invited to an audition. The interesting thing is, and we probably don't have enough time today, I auditioned for 3 years in a row.
Oh, wow.
So I was rejected the first 2 years.
Oh, wow.
For different reasons.
Yeah.
And I got in the third time I auditioned.
Well, third time lucky.
Third time lucky.
There you go. And that obviously put you on the course towards becoming our Grand Master.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't have thought so at the time.
Yes.
I became what they called an Assistant Grand Pursuivant.
Yes.
So the Pursuivants in that Grand Lodge environment are the administrative engine room of the Grand Team. And it was a pretty daunting experience back then, but a tremendous honour to be chosen, particularly after getting knocked back for a couple of years. It was a tremendous honour to go in, and represent Victoria as a Grand Officer.
I'm sure your lodge were very proud of you as well.
Well, it turns out I was the second person in the lodge's history to get into a Grand Team, and the one before me was 41 years earlier and did end up being a Grand Master.
Oh, there you go. So you've got a good record. Two for two.
2 for 2, certainly at that stage.
So the next person who gets asked, beware.
Exactly.
Beware.
Exactly.
So basically that's a fantastic summary of your early days and obviously how you got into the Grand line. And what I want to talk about now is the road to the Grand Mastership, because I talk to people out in Freemasons Victoria, not just here, overseas, and there's different processes about how this happens and a lot of misconceptions about how we actually choose our Grand Master. We're clearly a democratic organisation.
Yes, absolutely.
And from what I understand, and I guess you can build from here, is that you have to become the Deputy Grand Master first, and that's an elected position, and then you're allowed to go on to the position. Could you give us an idea of how it all works?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll give you just a thumbnail sketch of how I got there.
Yes. Yep.
And then the process.
Yes, absolutely.
That I went through. So, as I said, in 1992, I was auditioned and became an Assistant Grand Pursuivant. I then got invited back in 1996 and became a Senior Grand Deacon. Got invited back again in 1998 and became the Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies. And that position follows on to become the Grand Director of Ceremonies, which I did in 1999. When I finished that, in about 2000, I was invited to sit on the board of what was the Freemasons Hospital at that stage, which now belongs to Epworth. So I got a little bit of, I guess, administrative experience as opposed to ceremonial experience.
Yes.
In 2006, I was invited to be the Senior Grand Warden, which again is a ceremonial position predominantly. And then in 2008, I was invited to be the President of the Board of General Purposes.
That sounds like a big job.
And I did that for 2 years, and that's the governing body of Freemasons Victoria, so it is a fairly large job. So at the end of that, I guess I had a rank that entitled me to be called Right Worshipful Brother, and you have to be a Right Worshipful Brother to be eligible to be a candidate for Deputy Grand Master. There's an electoral college, so each district in Victoria nominates a representative that sits on this college. The Grand Master of the day adds 3 members to that college. So altogether there's about 22 or 23 people on this college. And as a candidate, you need certain criteria yourself, plus the person that seconds you and proposes you also needs to have certain criteria.
Okay. Yep.
You then need to submit a professional CV, a Masonic CV, and a statement of what you see as the future of Freemasonry. So like a 5-year vision statement. You then actually come and present to that college, and they review the candidates and make an appointment. So it is very much a democratic process. And I guess the impetus to do that comes either from the individual to nominate, to go in as a candidate for the role, or for somebody to come and talk to you and say, you should think about throwing your hat in the ring.
Yeah. So
and then, if you're successfully nominated, you become the Deputy Grand Master, and the Constitution is such that you automatically will continue on as Grand Master. So that happened, if I went in Grand Master as 2014, then I was Deputy in 2012, so that Electoral College was in July, August 2011.
Okay, yep.
So it's a
big process.
It's quite a process. And as I said, you have to stand up in front of this group of 22 or 23 people that have all your personal details in front of you, and they examine you.
And they ask you all the questions.
You do a presentation, and then they ask you all the questions, and then, sometimes there's only one candidate, sometimes there's been 3 candidates, 2 candidates, they decide.
In your year, was it contested?
It was not contested.
It's okay, but it was still obviously a grueling experience.
The year before, the election before, there were 3 candidates,
Wow.
and this last time I think there were 3 candidates. So it's just the way it
it's a good democratic
pans out.
process.
Yes,
exactly right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one things we've been reflecting on over the last 10 weeks of episodes for this podcast, and that is that we at the time of creation, we were a radical institution. We promoted things like democracy and equality,
that's
and,
right.
and it's still continuing, and I'm very proud of the fact that our system is democratic. And
it's very robust.
And it should be. All
very
democracies
robust democratic process.
Which is fantastic. Well, thank you for outlining that. I think you've obviously dispelled some misbeliefs or misconceptions out there, and it's good that people understand how the process actually works. Especially
and there's only a couple of criteria to be eligible. You have to have a rank that I think you have to be a right worshipful brother, and you have to have served in a grand team environment and have been entitled in that position to a rank of very.
Oh, okay.
So that's about the only criteria.
Otherwise, it's open to obviously any member who meets those 2 conditions.
Yep.
Which is fantastic. And so you go for this process. You get selected as Deputy Grand Master. How does that role work? So you put into the chair, the Deputy Grand Master's chair. The Grand Master's obviously installed, which at the time was Most Worshipful Brother Bob Jones.
Yep.
And you look at Bob, and you look to the left of you, and you think, in not too long, I'm going to be sitting there. What goes through your mind?
Well, a lot of things go through your mind. Obviously, the years I'd spent in various ceremonial roles, while you're not focused on the top job, I mean, you do observe things,
yes.
Particularly when you're the Grand Director, because you escort the Grand Master to a lot of functions, not just ceremonial functions, but other things that give you an exposure to what that role might entail. But it's like anything else, until you're in the hot seat, you really don't know. So as Deputy, you're sort of very open-minded about what's happening, and you're really an observer. Those 2 years as Deputy, you're learning the trade of Grand Mastership, I guess, so that when your turn comes in 2 years' time, the idea is that for the organisation, it's a seamless transition.
So for you, Most Worshipful Brother Bob would have been like a great mentor, someone to watch, someone to...
Well, I'd known Bob because he'd been a Grand Director some years earlier. We'd had an association that had been going for some years, so he wasn't a complete stranger.
Yeah.
And every Grand Master has his own way of going about things, and it was great working alongside Bob. And I learned a lot.
Yes.
And it's always daunting. The closer it got to my installation, the more daunting it became.
I can only imagine. From that point, like you said, constitutionally, you are entitled to become Grand Master. So the hurdles are really much personal rather than external. They're not institutional hurdles to becoming Grand Master. It's all preparing yourself for that position.
Absolutely.
So that's the hurdle. And how did you find that hurdle? As you said, it was daunting, but was there anything in particular you think that you set as a goal to overcome between the time?
I think we just take it in your stride, because you all of a sudden go on the board of general purpose, so you become part of the governing body, and you've got 2 years really to
get a feel for it.
To get a feel for that. Same with the ceremonial side. You tend to stand in for the Grand Master if he's not available for things. And you don't have you're not carrying any of the responsibility during that 2 years, but you're getting exposed to all the different issues and facets of the role that you're going to have to assume responsibility for. So it's sort of daunting, but it's not, because you don't have the responsibility.
It's like the wall that's coming, you're not sure what's going to hit you. Exactly right.
Exactly.
No, and I thank you very much for outlining that. And let's jump on right into now when you became Grandmaster. And I've only seen one grand installation. I attended my first grand installation this year, and that was Right Worshipful Brother Don Reynolds. Most Worshipful Brother Don Reynolds now. And one of the things that I noticed was that there's a lot of lead up to these things, a lot of planning, a lot of organisation. How intimately involved are you in that, or are you to take a step back and you're focusing maybe on the process of coming into office? I guess what I'm asking is, in the United States especially, you have a lame duck period between presidential candidates taking over certain positions. Is there such a period in Freemasonry Victoria? And what role do you play in that period?
Yeah, there's not really a caretaker mode we enter into. What happens towards the latter part of your second year as Deputy Grand Master, you're very much in planning mode for your grand installation and the associated functions. Myself and together with my wife Sue, we pretty well had our hands on all the various functions. And there's several functions surrounding a grand installation where there's a new Grand Master. So it's very much hands-on and it's very much to your personal structure. So we changed the nature of a number of things.
Yes.
For a variety of reasons when we went in as Grand Master.
Well, it sounds like the perfect thing to do. I mean, considering it's going to be your 2 years in that position, why not put your personal touch to it? Let's talk about the installation ceremony itself. One thing that I want to sort of ask you before we go into the details of maybe the address you gave that evening is that I understand, I don't know the exact wording, but I know when the Grand Master is put into the chair, the outgoing Grand Master presents to you, says, Grand Master, here are your brethren. In other words, here is this incredible institution.
Yep.
What was the weight on your shoulders at that point?
They say, brethren, behold your new Grand Master. It's almost surreal in that, because if you look at it, for me, it was a journey of 20-something years. In fact, 30-something years from the time I initially joined. So to all of a sudden be in that position was just incredible. And being only the second Jewish Grand Master in 125 years, it sort of added another dimension.
Yes, absolutely.
It was just incredible.
And I'm sure that would have been like a huge weight on the shoulders, but one that obviously, as you said, you had a long history leading up to that, which you prepared for well.
Yep.
So let's talk about your first address. And I understand that with these sorts of addresses, especially the opening, you want to set a lot of general principles and platitudes about what sort of character and approach you want to take to leadership. And I think this is pretty interesting because from what I've observed is the role of Grand Master is a leadership role, obviously, but it seems to be one that's quite different to, say, ones I've been traditionally exposed to. It seems to be, they've got the ceremonial element, you've got the cultural element, you've got the administrative element. It seems like a lot of pressure for one person to bear. And I congratulate you on surviving the 2 years. But what I wanted to ask was, you went about your address by talking to the public directly, and you spoke about the great emblematical lights in Freemasonry. And you pointed them out to the public as a way of saying, this is who we are. And you summed it up fantastically. I just want to sort of get an idea, what were you thinking in putting that together? What were you trying to say? What message were you trying to put out there?
In many ways, it was probably more what I didn't want to say on the night. And I thought that my inaugural address was the time to do that.
Yes.
And what I didn't want to do was make a policy statement about, I'm going to do this, no child will live in poverty, all those sorts of things. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to, more than anything, set a tone for my term as Grand Master. And the tone for me was that everything I want to do was going to come, straight from my heart and with deep integrity and commitment. I wanted to reaffirm the importance of family to me, also my heritage and my religious background, without sort of pushing it in people's faces, but I wanted that to be a part of it, and I wanted to set a tone that I was approachable and that I was just a regular Freemason like everybody else, just a regular guy that happened for this period of time. I was going to be the Grand Master. So I thought there's enough people in the system and in the infrastructure to talk about policy and constitution and those sorts of things. And if you listen to the words of the obligation that the Grand Master takes when he goes in, there's your policy statement.
Yes, exactly.
You uphold the constitution and, you do whatever you can to support those things. That's part of your obligation.
Yes.
So, I wanted to show that I'm a real person and try and connect with people. And I made the, bold move of moving away from behind a podium and standing out in the middle of the floor of Grand Lodge. And the other thing I did on what was a pretty significant occasion was not have any notes for that.
Yes, I did say that, yeah.
And somebody said to me later, what were you possibly thinking, not to take any notes with you? You've got 1,500 people in the auditorium.
Yeah.
You've got thousands on the internet. It's being recorded. It's being televised live on Channel 31. What were you thinking? And I said, you know what? I'm glad I didn't think about that as I went in.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, honestly, seeing that, I was watching the video because I obviously wasn't able to attend at the time. I think I was only just joined or I've been overseas. And I saw that night. It struck a chord with me. I mean, one of the favourite parts of the first degree for me is meeting on the level, partying on the square. And I think you emphasise that so significantly. And the fact that you're willing to show emotion as well, I commend you for that because, like you said, we are human beings. We're a human organisation. And
Absolutely.
Some of the perceptions out there, I guess, is that grand officers are very stern down the line, which I think is a huge misconception. And I think you automatically set the tone well by breaking it down. So I admired that.
It was a big, it was probably a thing that built up in me for many, many years.
Yeah.
And it provided me with a platform to release all of that.
Yes.
And I'd decided long before that night that having gone through the Electoral College process, been the deputy for 2 years and automatically the Grand Master, my role was not to win votes or be popular or behave in a way that other people expected me to behave. I felt that I'd earned the right to be myself.
Exactly right.
So in many ways it was liberating to do that.
Absolutely. And to quote you directly, our biggest challenge is dealing with change. That's how you set the tone for your leadership, which I thought was courageous. And I think that bridges well into the next topic I want to talk about, which is when you did finally deliver your first policy speech, which was in the September quarterly communication after your installation. And I just want to sort of walk you through some of the things you said in that speech, because I want to sort of the listeners to understand what the direction you said. You highlighted, and you're very honest, which I thought was very bold, you highlighted that every Grand Master has success, failures, but specifically controversies. So you set that tone very, very clearly. You praised the organisation's diversity. You praised the generous charitable work that obviously we undertake as an organisation. And you spoke about the inherent relevance of younger generations, which obviously relates significantly to what we're trying to do here in the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. And you committed that Freemasons Victoria was not going to just survive. It was going to outlast, it was going to grow and flourish. When setting those policy statements, clearly you had in mind reform. I can just feel it. And I'm trying not to judge it through the lens of history, knowing the things that you'd achieved. But at that point, how ambitious was your reform agenda? And how far into your agenda had you come at that point? Or was this something that you were going to come to much later?
Look, during the early 2000s, I was part of some committees that were involved in strategic planning for the organisation. And subsequently on the board, as I said, and then working with Bob. Each board and each Grand Master tends to work to a longer-term strategic plan that we're part of. So I worked very close with Bob in the formulation of that plan and in the execution of that plan. So in many ways, I was just continuing the strategy that had been laid down by my predecessors, but perhaps doing it in my own way and using my own, for use of a better term, personality to drive those things. So I think the change reform was already on its way, and I guess I wanted to continue to break down those perceived barriers between what was loosely called Grand Lodge and regular, lodge members.
Yes.
And as I said, I was back then, and I still am now. And while I was Grand Master, I'm still a regular lodge member. I was a past master from a regular lodge.
Exactly right. And although the ranks and esteems are important for the purposes of the organisational structure, ultimately the lesson that everyone should remember is that we're all equal. And the capacity for me to interview you today and meet with you on the level is important principles that people forget.
So those first 6 months in the role, I guess you're pretty active in going out to lodges and seeing things through the lens of Grand Master. Yeah. But it reinforced a lot of those beliefs in terms of things like diversity and charity.
Yes.
You're right at the pointy end of all those things, and so you'd be presenting checks and you'd be talking to organisations that we've been assisting for years, And so you really got to see it firsthand. And so a lot of those things that we talk about, sometimes they sound like motherhood statements. You know, you find that they're for real. It's fantastic.
Which is important, and I think that, in saying that, I think setting good foundations is about having good values, fundamental values, and I think that you outlined that pretty well.
And it was clear to me that, yes, the organisation, having survived in Victoria at that stage for 125 years, and in the UK for almost 300, I was pretty confident, in fact extremely confident, that it will outlast us all as an organisation.
I really hope it does. Now that we've sort of outlined what the beginning of your term in office was, I want to talk about a reflection now on your period of office. And specifically, I've got about 5 questions I want to ask you about your views on that time. We'll talk about the stuff that you succeeded in, and some of the stuff that perhaps was a bit more controversial in the views of some, and some things that maybe your reflections and the passing of time has allowed you to reflect upon that you might have perhaps done differently or thought about differently, or maybe even said, no, I don't regret anything, which is a reasonable human response. Now, what were some of the big reforms that happened during your time? I'm aware of some of them, but I'd like to see how you articulate them. And what were some of the tasks you had to do and the challenges you had to face to make those things happen? Because I think it's really important that people understand the amount of the achievement that you actually achieved in your 2 years.
Well, there was an additional rollout of part of the strategic plan, and that involved going out to lodges and supporting the speaker of the day, and then taking questions as Grand Master on those things. One of the bigger ones was we made the move to restructure our philanthropic part of Freemasons Victoria. The structure had been in place for 125 years. The Board of General Purposes had initiated a report in 2007, which I was on the board when it was presented in 2008, recommending what we should consider in terms of philanthropy. And it took the better part of 7 years to make that actually happen, because it required constitutional change. And it was during one of the quarterlies when I was Grand Master that was presented. Now, that also had required a roadshow around Victoria. Yep. We did a webcast. We had Q&A documents. We had PowerPoint slides. We had everything, and we'd roll that around. And there was mixed feelings. Yep. It was quite controversial, and to the extent that opposers to the motion, bust people into a quarterly communication to vote against it. Yep. They handed out how to vote no cards on their way in, and it required a count of the vote, which you don't get to see very often.
No.
And that evening there was something like just in excess of 600 brethren at the quarterly, and the vote for the proposition won by something like only 35 votes.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah.
So it was a pretty big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But what it did was it highlighted to us that only people that could come to a quarterly communication could vote.
Yeah.
And only those that were wardens of a lodge could vote if they were Master Masons. Otherwise, it was Masters and Past Masters. And somebody asked me on the night, how are you going to tell, if somebody puts up their hand, whether they're a Master Mason, whether they're I said, because we're Freemasons.
Yes.
And I trust.
You trust them.
I trust the people.
Yeah.
But what we've done as a consequence of those sort of issues, we've now changed the Constitution so that any financial Freemason, from an entered apprentice up, can vote. And they can vote on any of the centres. And we've got about 12 centres throughout the state now.
Yeah.
And we exercised that for the first time a few months ago. So, it was a big thing in itself. The philanthropic change was massive.
Yeah, huge, yeah.
But the flow on, in terms of some of the consequential issues, have also been massive.
Yes,
that have been resolved as a result.
And I think that concept of opening it up to all members of the organisation is fantastic. I look at it as we're stakeholders in the organisation, every member, like a shareholder in a company. And
you pay the same rates as everybody else,
exactly
and
right.
you either you're part of the organisation or you're not. And I went to the banquet hall after that communication, and I had a number of people approach me that said, I'm a Master Mason, I'm a fellow craft, I'm an accountant. I work in philanthropy. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'm supportive of it. But I couldn't vote. I said to them, "You're right."
Yeah.
And so it took us probably another year or year and a half, but we addressed that.
It's very interesting how you're talking about the consequential effects of these big things happening. And look, if you in any way had a role in that consequential effect, then thank you. I think it's
right.
fantastic.
And the other thing that happened during my time is we moved out of the Dallas Brooks Hall.
Huge, absolutely huge project. That isn't
Right,
it?
towards the very early part of my term. It happened actually at the end of Bob Jones's term. We demolished the building on the corner of Nepean Highway and North Road. Now, it's still an empty block of land, but that was a big thing.
Yeah.
We also, shut centres down because of safety or other issues, and we'd had a proposition about property for some time, but until we actually were able to show the membership some of the things that could be done, such as the Box Hill Centre now, which is pretty well state of the art, and people go into it and there's a wow factor, and they think this is Freemasonry in the 21st century, not the old dingy hall where the light globes don't work, where the toilets don't flush, there's no soap here, there's
And the stairs fall through. Yeah, it's exactly.
So and we've started that trend, and people can now see the things that are possible.
Yes.
And so maybe a bit more demanding in terms of the environment they want to meet in.
Yes.
So I've been a big supporter of that for a number of years.
Yeah, and I think that's a reality that every jurisdiction's facing, isn't it, in terms of managing property portfolios that are perhaps reflective of an older time when we had a larger membership and things weren't costing as much as they do today.
And nobody thought about creating them as financially sustainable buildings either. They thought, well, just multi-purpose or single-purpose hall. A lodge will meet there once a month. They'll rehearse once a month. They might have a committee meeting. Well,
and the rates will pay themselves.
Yeah. So
Right.
it's not sustainable.
One of the other things that I noticed that you set out in your initial policy speech, and I think that you achieved, was a lifting. You talked about a lifting of the standard of the way we do our ritual, and the way we do things generally. But I think it was a focus specifically on the way we conduct our ceremonies. Now, as a young person, and I'd like to think this is universal, but especially as a young person who joined the organisation, I was lucky to join a lodge that had fantastic ritual abilities. And as we visit, we visit probably 6 or 7 initiations a month. We see varying types of ritual, and sometimes you think maybe the candidate is getting a poor impression of our organisation. So I can relate to you as to why that is an objective, but I want to hear from your sort of perspective. What was your thinking in setting that out, and what did you seek to achieve, and what do you believe the outcome of that result was over the 2 years of your period in office?
Look, I think anybody that's been to a live show of some quality, whether it's Phantom of the Opera, whether it's Cats, whether it's whatever it is, and it's a great cast, the music is good, the theatre's good, they'll go and see that show multiple times.
Yes.
You hear people say, I've gone to see it, 6 times. You say, how do you go and see it 6 times? They say, I never tire of it because I just love to see professionals do what they do. And when I first joined, one of the things that stuck in my mind from my initiation was some of the addresses that the people were giving to me. I was just completely blown away, and in particular, I didn't know whether they were making this stuff up or they certainly weren't reading it.
Yeah.
And just the ability and the stories and the way they told them, I think it's a great feature of our organisation, and it's certainly, I believe, part of the personal development that people undergo as they go through the organisation. And what happened over the years, I think people just got a bit tired.
They've done it 1,000 times.
Yeah. And because we didn't have an injection of younger people and members coming in, then they weren't doing as much degree work as they were 30, 40 years ago. I think people lost the edge and the desire. And one of the programs we pushed along to address that was the accreditation program. And it had a couple of stumblings along the way. This was a program that ran for some time, and we ended up with 6 lodges that were accredited or something like that.
My lodge being one of them. Exactly, there you go.
And we thought, well, that's not achieving the objective out of nearly 300 lodges at the time.
Yeah.
So provisional accreditation was introduced, which gave people a more achievable target. And that program is constantly under review to identify ways to get that standard elevated because I think it is an attraction to people. If they see, why do people enjoy seeing grand ceremonial teamwork? And because they do it with accuracy and precision because they train, and they take pride in what they do, and they love what they do, and it's done with passion, but it's done with expert guidance.
Yes. Yes.
And if those sort of things happen in a lodge environment, then all the people coming in are enthused as well. If you come in and people don't know their lines, or people, read their words, where's the inspiration come from?
Exactly right. Yeah. So yeah. Where's the value for? I'm not going to say value for money in a way but I think it is a return for investment. You join an organisation.
You're giving of your time, which is a valuable resource, and you don't want to give of your time and go to something that is substandard or where people don't have an attitude which shows that they care about what they do. Now, is everybody a fantastic ritualist? No. For some people, it's much harder than it is for others, and you want people to just do their absolute best.
Yes.
And take pride in what they do.
And if that's all you're asking of people, and that's fair enough, I think. Yeah. But the accreditation program, I know my lodge went through that process, Brunswick United Lodge, and it ended up getting accredited. But it was a long journey, but it was a healthy one, I think.
Look, for those that have embraced it, it has been healthy. But maybe it needs to be modified to try and empower and energise lodges to want to improve themselves, as opposed to building a regime that's all about monitoring and policing.
Yes.
That's not what it's about. It's about improving the standard and wanting each lodge to do better.
Well, that's the last thing I want to ask you about, some of the stuff that you achieved during your period in office. I know that there's been a bit of dialogue, and this is not just from grassroots members, it's from grand officers that have come to installations I've been to. There's a dialogue now that perhaps suggests that we were over-regulating Freemasonry. And like you said, the issue was, maybe the intention was for self-empowerment and to encourage people to be self-reliant. Do you think that translated into over-policing, or do you think that translated into an over-regulation, or do you see it as through a different prism?
No, I agree in that when I became president of the board back in 2008, there was something like 23 committees and in excess of 200 people on committees. And I think what happened is the committees started to take on a life of their own, and they perhaps forgot why they were there in the first place. And so during my time as president, the size of committees probably got halved.
Yes.
And today there's probably 70 people on committees. And if you listen to the rhetoric that's going on at the moment, there's an organisational restructure which is looking at how we align the paid staff of the organisation with the board that governs the organisation, with the brethren who have responsibility for the portfolios that we have, and making sure they're all accountable.
Yes.
And that we're doing what we all doing together.
Yes.
And so I think that's going to address a lot of those. So I think what happened, we did over-regulate. When if you look at the Constitution, it gives the lodge a lot of opportunity to manage its own affairs.
Exactly right, and that's something I think the lodges forget, that the charter or warrant gives them an incredible amount of individual freedom.
Yeah. And there was a guideline that came out years ago that said, you don't have to have every meeting as a ceremonial meeting. You could just have a non-ceremonial meeting, have a dinner or almost a social function that's considered a meeting.
Yes, yeah.
And people think, that's novel. But those things have been there for years. The lodges just haven't. So I think the change, one of the fundamental changes I wanted to see occur was that Grand Lodge or Freemasons Victoria moved away from being the policeman,
yes,
to being the facilitator of lodges being able to do what they need to do, and for the resources of Freemasons Victoria to be available to lodges if they wanted to run something that we'd provide some expertise and resource.
Yes,
but it wasn't our show. It was the lodge's own program. So
that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to sort of reflect on that period. And what I want to do is a sort of before we move on from your reflections, I want to talk about we talked about your first address as Grand Master. I want to talk about your last sort of capacity to address before the Grand Installation this year. And from what I witnessed, it was December 2015. And I believe it was a really hot night from what I could see looking at the Brethren's face. It'd be fair to say that this address had a significantly different tone to your first address in 2014. Whilst this is natural and you expect this, I couldn't help but observe that the address had a very important significance. And you stressed the following. I'm just going to list what you said. You said that the theme of judgment was there. You said you'd been judged quite thoroughly, which I thought was very interesting. But one of the most significant things that stood out to me, someone familiar with this, the conflict that is happening between Israel and Palestine, which has been an ongoing issue for a very long time, and I'm sure it's close to your heart as is a lot of people. You talked about how the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas were, despite the bloodshed, the war, the anguish, they were able to come together as men, look each other in the eye and shake each other's hand. And you juxtapose that to a position where you said you'd attended a meeting. I think it was the quarterly communication before. And you'd approached brethren, and I'll just stress that, brothers, of in a fraternal organisation in a Western country like Australia that is free from such terrors that happens in the Middle East, wouldn't shake your hand. I found that to be quite profound. Not only the story itself, but the fact that you felt that it was important to mention that. Obviously, there's something, the message you're trying to get across is that, from what I interpreted, was that I think we get too encroached into our emotions. We forget that we belong to a voluntary organisation of men that are coming together voluntarily to enjoy each other's company, and we're brothers. And it really impacted me when you said that.
And we sign up, for the same code, the same set of rules, the same constitution, as you said. Yeah, and you said it very eloquently. We're a volunteer organisation. We're a fraternity. We're not a company. We don't manufacture anything. We're not a country. We don't have political views. We don't have religious views. And earlier that year, I actually had been to a grand installation of a Grand Master in Israel.
Yes.
And witnessed firsthand diversity in the Middle East within the context of Freemasonry, and it was just inspiring.
Absolutely.
So for me to be at a September quarterly communication as the Grand Master of Freemasons Victoria and extend my hand to a brother and somebody I knew, for them to refuse to shake hands, it was profound for me as well, and it dawned on me that there's something wrong.
Yeah.
If within our organisation, and you know what, we've got all sorts of characters within the 10,000 members we have today. There's all sorts of characters, but we're part of a brotherhood.
Yes.
And even if I disagree with you, even if I don't like you, I should be able to shake your hand.
Yes.
Within the context of Freemasons. So it touched me when it occurred, and I tended to, during my term, I guess use my emotions to help frame the addresses I gave, but within the context of Freemasonry and its values.
Yeah.
So I felt it was important to mention, and I think it was only in the 3 or 4 weeks prior to that December quarterly communication, I saw that photo between Netanyahu and Abbas, and the commentary saying, they hadn't shaken hands in 5 years, and I thought, these guys can shake hands.
Yeah, we can, yeah.
And I felt that I couldn't shake hands with another brother. It makes no sense to me. So I wanted to share it.
Yeah, no, it's good you did.
For, just for that reason. And there were 2 things I did, I guess, during my addresses. One was my inaugural address, where I came out to the floor of Grand Lodge, and I also smashed a glass symbolically. People still, that sort of resonated with people. And the other is when I spoke about somebody not shaking hands with me. I still get people that come up to me now and say, I can't believe that happened. And I say, neither can I.
Yes.
And the other thing I've been very cautious about since that day is I've never publicly indicated who that brother is.
No, that's fine. But I think the person who did it is irrelevant. I think the cultural issue surrounding why this is happening is important. Look, I respect the fact you did that. I have to say, the capacity to be able to reveal the ugly side of our organisation is a sign of strength, in my view. We can't just talk about the good things. We can't just say that we're fantastic and beyond reproach. We need to be able to acknowledge our faults. And I know that when you do that, or any leader does that, you get recriminations. But I admire the fact that you were able to do that. And
thank you. I took a stance, as I said, from the very beginning. I wanted to be me.
Yes.
I didn't want to be somebody else or somebody else's expectations of what a Grandmaster should do and say. And it's very hard when you're in that leadership position. You're influenced by all sorts of things.
Yes.
But I very rarely spoke about policy or constitutional change. I wanted to be a leader that inspired people to think and to feel.
Yes.
You know, one of the first addresses I gave, I related a story where I pinned a jewel on somebody's pocket and it didn't have a plastic thing at the end. I poked him and he almost jumped, and I said to him, "Do you feel anything?" And I used that as part of my address at one of the quarterlies. And I said, you've got to feel something. Yeah. If you don't feel something about the organisation and you're unhappy inside the organisation, and you won't shake hands with another brother, why are you in our organisation?
Maybe the time has come. Exactly right.
Right. Yeah. So, I wanted people to feel something.
I think that's very admirable.
So, I didn't go in with a grand design of doing these things. In many ways, it's how it unfolded.
Yeah, and that's like life in general. It's a natural consequence of your character being constantly put to test. But look, in terms of wrapping up what you said there, one thing that really, I think, brought it home was that instead of being out there and being sort of looking for bloodthirst or revenge, you did say, and quite true to our ritual, about dropping a tear of sympathy on the failings of your brother. So despite some of the more unsavoury things that happened to you during your time of leadership, you still were able to forgive, forget, and reflect, and appreciate that humans are inherently...
We're all humans.
Or inherently flawed. Okay, so we'll move on from that, and but thank you for being honest and frank with me on that one. I think our listeners will really appreciate an insight into that. I remember when I first saw your speech, I was like, wow, I'd love to know what happened there. But let's talk about something that I thought was particularly important to you, obviously, considering you come from a Jewish faith, and I know that the stories of our ritual must be very significant too, considering the relationship with the Judeo religion. And I want to ask you, considering your family heritage, and you did come to Australia in 1957, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And obviously your family, like a lot of families, fled some of the greatest horrors in human history. In terms of your faith, how does that influence? It must have a huge impact on your culturally, religiously, spiritually, all these ways.
Yeah, look, the situation is that a lot of the ceremonial and ritual work within Freemasons is based on the Old Testament, which is the core of many religions, but in particular, Judaism. And I do tend to go to synagogue once a week, and I sit there and I just listen. When they read the Torah, I often look at the English translation and I pick the Masonic stories as we're going through. And I just felt that when I went in as Grand Master, I thought I was treading a fine line in that I didn't want to make an issue of it.
Yes.
But I wanted to indicate that I was proud of it as well. And so for, the first thing when we did the planning, I mentioned that as you complete your term as deputy, you start to think about what you're going to do as Grand Master. The grand installation is traditionally held on a Friday night, which is the start of the Sabbath. Yes. And I know people can't see where we are at the moment, but we're sitting in my home, and you can see that we're set up for a Sabbath dinner this evening with my family, right? Yeah. So the first thing I did was reorganise the program so that we did not have the grand installation on the Friday night. We had it on the Thursday night. So that I know there were some religious Jewish people that came as a consequence of it not being on the Friday. And what we did on the Friday, instead of the grand installation, we visited a synagogue. We went to the Melbourne Hebrew congregation, and we had a traditional Jewish banquet following that, which was held at the Freemasons' homes. And Jewish people don't kneel when they take obligations, so I didn't kneel. And I wore a head covering. You can see I'm not wearing one now, but I felt any time you take an obligation on the Bible, if you're a Jewish person, you should, cover your head. So it all became part of it, and leading up to it, I thought about breaking that glass because I could see some parallels between the reasons people do it typically at a Jewish wedding and Freemasonry. Somehow I linked those things, and I thought I could wrap it all together and use it as a vehicle to make pledges to the Freemasons of Victoria.
Yeah.
And I think it had an impact.
Yes, it did.
People still talk about that, smashing that glass. But so to me it was a natural. I felt very comfortable being a proud Jewish person as Grand Master. And then, as I said, I went to Israel, and yes, the current Grand Master is Jewish, but the one prior to him was a Palestinian Arab.
Which is incredible.
Right? And we sat, every lodge environment in Israel, they have the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, and Muslims, Christians and Jews, Freemasons sit together.
It's fantastic.
And they acknowledge it. They recognise, the value of that. And that, so where I could, I guess I incorporated, as I said, without wanting to push my religious beliefs down anybody's throat, but I wanted people to recognise that it doesn't matter within the Masonic context what your background is. You can be Grand Master, you can be out there and you can be proud of it, and you'll be welcomed wherever you are within the Masonic world.
And I think that's a fantastic summary of the whole. I had a bunch of questions and I think you've answered them all quite eloquently. But I guess that's the thing that came out to me. I didn't see it as you... I hope no one saw it as you trying to force your views down anyone's throat. I really think it sees as a celebration of diversity. A celebration of diversity. And I think that's fantastic. And I hope for anyone listening out there who is not a Freemason, and whether you're of the Jewish faith or any faith really, I hope that's an inspiring story for you. That you can hear from a person who is the immediate past Grand Master of this big organisation telling you that you can do it. So there is opportunities for leadership in our organisation, no matter where you come from. Which is fantastic.
And at different levels, from
the
local lodge level, the district level, at the Freemasons Victoria level. There's lots of opportunities, and they're open to everyone that cares, that wants to get involved, that's sincere, that does things from their heart.
Yes.
And are proud of where they've come from.
Fantastic. Well, what we'll do now, I think, and thank you very much for giving me your time. What I want to do is just quickly give you an opportunity to have final reflection on your time as Grand Master. Hillel, if you could tell our listeners, how do you hope history will remember Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict's time served as the 44th Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria?
It's a big and difficult question to answer, and I think I'd like to be remembered for somebody that reflected what any Freemason in any lodge feels, that they can do it, they can be themselves, and they can say what they feel in terms of either their emotions or an opinion on something, and do it within the context of brotherhood. All within a framework of change. And as I said a few times, it's a difficult thing for an organisation to deal with, let alone one that has so much history and heritage. So I'd like to think that I humanised the role of Grand Master, and that I made people think about things, and hopefully I made them feel something. It was a great honour and privilege for me to be the Grand Master of Freemasons Victoria.
Hillel Benedict, on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, I'd like to thank you for your time and thank you for giving us the honour to interview you today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And welcome back from that fantastic interview with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict, the immediate past Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria. I hope you enjoyed what really was an interview that we wanted to make interesting. Sometimes it can be tempting when talking to senior officers in your jurisdiction to play it safe and to not ask any tough or controversial questions. But as this podcast is about bringing people to light, we approached our interview with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel in a way that ensured that we were fair and accurate in the way we asked about his time as Grand Master. We acknowledge that it's hard for a Grand Master to be able to get a fair go in the Masonic community by expressing their views in the way that they have. So that was a benefit of being able to interview Hillel. However, we also acknowledge that there's differing views on differing perspectives about times that people serve in leadership, and we thought that it'd only be fair to ask not only the positives and the easy questions of our past Grandmaster, but asked some of the tough ones, which honestly I thought he answered candidly, he answered with dignity, and he provided a really comprehensive response to what has been some of the more pressing questions I've had since having studied and explored his time as Grandmaster. So once again, thank you to Most Worshipful Brother Hillel for giving us the opportunity to ask those questions, and for making history by being one of the first past Grandmasters to participate so openly and so professionally. So that's it for episode 10 of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict. Coming up next week, we have another contested discussion similar to the one we did last week with co-masonry. This discussion will be on the question, is Freemasonry inherently conservative? It's a good question, and there'll be some arguments put in favour of that by Brother Lucas Crandalls, who is intimately involved in the post-production of this podcast, but also an avid Masonic participant and researcher. We'll also be bringing back Brother Brendan McCullum, who appeared in episode 3 of the podcast, who'll be making a comeback to talk about why he thinks Freemasonry is not inherently conservative, it is in fact quite progressive. I'll be the moderator for this episode, and I look forward to you being able to hear some of the really interesting arguments put on both sides. Is Freemasonry inherently conservative? Let us know your thoughts by commenting below in the comments or sending us an email at contact@blue.fmvic.com. Further, if you have any questions for Hillel Benedict relating to this episode, please send us an email at contact@blue.fmvic.com, and we'll forward our emails and questions to Hillel, who has agreed that he'll try and get back to you if possible. Once again, thank you very much for listening to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina, and we look forward to speaking to you next week.
You've been listening to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. We look forward to speaking to you on our next edition, and until then, we are happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.